Your skills are outdated, effective immediately. That's what he said. Right there in the third-floor glass box they call a leadership transparency zone, like firing someone next to the kombucha tap made it feel less like a guillotine. Everyone was pretending not to watch, but they always do. 22 years, and he tossed the sentence at me like he was swiping left on a dating app. My badge still had the old logo on it. That was the first thing I noticed, how it clashed with his fresh branding, the little iconography update he bragged about in the last all-hands. I unclipped it slowly, placed it beside my desk key, and then slid both across the table like I was folding in a poker hand I never got to play. He didn't even look at them. Just nodded, exhaled through his nose like I was a decision he'd already made 2 slides ago. They called it a strategic modernization. Translation: the new CTO needed a scalp to show the board his reorg had teeth, and mine was gray enough to count. Now, before we dive headfirst into this delightful tale of corporate amnesia and poetic justice, a small request: if you've ever worked a job where they smiled while cutting you loose, hit that like button. And if 95% of you are just eavesdropping without subscribing, come on now. Hit that sub. It actually helps the team. Helps me keep telling you how the sausage really gets made. Anyway, back to the bloodletting. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. That would have made it easier for them. I just stood up calmly, adjusted the sleeves of my cardigan, and walked out. No dramatic flourish. No scene. Just the sound of my orthopedic soles walking down the corridor. I designed the HVAC layout for back in 04. Past the biometric scanner I personally deployed in 09. To the motion sensors I helped calibrate after that wiring issue in 13. The same corridor where new hires still got lost trying to find the bathroom. I'd watched 4 CEOs come and go. I'd onboarded generations of engineers, some of whom still couldn't find the SSH keys unless I spoon-fed them. I built their infrastructure when cloud still meant storms ruined your satellite dish. Stayed up Christmas Eve patching a security breach nobody even knew had happened. Had my name scrubbed off a dozen projects because someone higher up needed a promotion. But none of that matters when the new guy wants to sunset legacy systems. And apparently, that includes me. I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 20 minutes. No tears, just silence. The kind that comes after a long scream you never let out. I watched as the glass box above me swallowed another poor soul for their weekly performance review, wondering how many more were going to get streamlined before this guy figured out that buzzwords don't keep systems running. I drove home the long way, through side streets, past the faded warehouses and half-gentrified districts that used to hold the city's bones. At a red light, I thought about the dual-auth chains, about the transition protocols I'd built, about the names no one ever bothered to replace in the system registry. Not out of malice, just laziness. I didn't design the architecture to be cryptic. I designed it to be safe, resilient, to require verification and deliberate handoff. Because real infrastructure isn't magic. It's responsibility in code form. And I wasn't mad they let me go. I was just surprised no one asked what would happen if no one replaced the architect. And I knew no one had. I poured a glass of red, not the fancy stuff. Just something that could sit quiet in the background while I ran diagnostics. Old habit. I always debug better with a glass in one hand and Miles Davis in the other. The house was still, except for the occasional hum of the fridge trying its best and the faint clicking of the furnace turning over. I hadn't touched this machine in months, my old laptop, when I kept disconnected from the company VPN ever since they started requiring biometric logins for internal notes. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being old school, booted it up, logged in with muscle memory, and there it was. My local dev sandbox. A little messy, sure, some deprecated libraries, some half-finished notes, but underneath that, the spine. The documentation I'd built in parallel to the system itself. Not for them, for me, because you can't count on people to remember what you did right until something goes wrong. The first file I opened was labeled ScrapDoc, short for System Keychain Relay Authentication Protocol. Inside, the entire layout of how identity propagated through the core services. Dual auth paths, token validation decay, obsolete if you know what you're doing. Lethal if you think logging in as admin solves everything. Every microservice, every handshake, every time-based certificate. It all originated from the early assumptions I wrote during a 3-day caffeine fugue 15 years ago. We didn't have Kubernetes back then. Just Dana, one server, and a whiteboard with marker stains that still live under the new CTO's growth mindset mural. I opened the failsafe directory next. Encrypted, obviously. Took me a few minutes to remember the salt string I'd used. Turns out it was Yormum69, which felt juvenile and now mildly hilarious in a cosmic way. Inside that directory, backup tokens, hashed passkeys, a Deadman switch trigger for deprecated services, all inactive, all still tied to my ID. I wasn't in the system anymore, not officially. My admin access was revoked the moment I was shown the door, but revoking an account doesn't erase its fingerprints. I didn't need to touch anything, just wanted to see if anyone had even tried to patch the void. Spoiler, they hadn't. In the metadata chain for our production authentication flow, the system architect role was still listed as Dana K. Not vacant, not transferred, not even archived, just there, waiting, as if I'd never left, which made sense in a twisted way. When you build something to be invisible until broken, people tend to forget it exists. Until they're standing in the ruins asking, who set this up? I leaned back, sipping my wine, and stared at the blinking cursor on an old terminal window. I ran a few local simulations, mocked the failover behavior of one of our most sensitive internal APIs. Sure enough, it crashed beautifully without the correct signature, mine. The system didn't know I was gone. It was just waiting for the next hand to press the right buttons in the right order. And that hand didn't exist. No one had asked for transition. No one had filed a formal reassignment. No one even requested the decryption keys for my last round of container sign-offs. They'd walked me out with a smile and assumed the system would magically absorb the change. But architecture isn't a potted plant. You don't just water it and hope for the best. It's a living thing, and right now, they'd cut its nervous system. I closed the lid and stared into the dark for a while. Wasn't angry anymore. Anger's what you feel when there's still hope. This was something different, something colder. I'd spent 2 decades building the spine of a thing I knew would outlive me, and now I realized they'd throw me out without even bothering to see if the body could stand without it. And that's when I knew something they didn't. I didn't need to do a damn thing. They'd already set the fire. All I had to do was wait for the smoke. The thing about engineers, they're problem solvers. Till they're forced to solve problems they don't understand. That's when the real circus starts. 2 weeks after my sunsetting, the modernization initiative launched like a wet firework. I only know because an old colleague, well, colleague is generous, more like a kid I trained through 2 panic attacks and 1 surprise divorce, posted something vague on LinkedIn. Big moves at the company. Excited for the next chapter. That kind of cheer sounds like a scream if you've been in the game long enough. Inside the office, they were ripping out everything with the word legacy in it. Legacy, in this case, meaning the code that actually works. New microservices were deployed with trendy names. Hydra, Nimbus. One was just called Glow. No one could tell me what Glow did, but apparently it was aligned with vision-forward modularity. Meanwhile, the backbone, critical automation pipelines that handled our deployment triggers, was breaking silently. One senior dev, Jorge, flagged it. Bless him. Probably the last man standing who still remembered that our deployment stack had dependencies so old they practically predated Stack Overflow. He submitted a formal blocker ticket. Legacy pipeline, tokens not compiling with container build triggers. Suspect handshake, mismatch in Jenkins runner was code for nothing works and I'm too afraid to say so in a meeting. The CTO dismissed it in Slack with a thumbs up emoji and a message. Keep pushing, trust the refactor. Refactor my ass. Meanwhile, some poor soul must have reconnected one of my old monitoring scripts. I'd set it up years ago for QA to track stale API calls. It used a webhook that pinged my private dev server, an IP they must have forgotten to scrub when they cleared my accounts. One ping, that's all it took. I was brushing my teeth when the alert hit. Alert, auth validate token chain, error signature mismatch source, environment prod 01, initiated by user CTO SVC. I spat the toothpaste out laughing. That specific error only showed up if someone tried to override a token path without the architect's signature. And it was trying to call a function I'd buried deep inside the legacy code I hadn't documented publicly, one I'd named Sisyphus Loop out of spite. I closed the alert window and logged out of the server. No reason to leave fingerprints. It was never about sabotage, just design. I built the system like a locked garden. If you didn't have the right keys, all you could do was stare at the vines choking your own ambitions. But that one ping told me everything I needed to know. They didn't understand what they'd inherited. They didn't know which parts were still breathing on life support. They didn't even know enough to ask the right questions. And the guy leading the charge? He was swinging a machete in a server room, calling it progress. Every day after that, I stayed off-grid. No Slack, no calls, no burner logins, just silence. But I could feel it happening. The slow, cascading breakdowns. The quiet panic behind closed doors. A moment in every corporate tragedy where the new leadership realizes they've been rearranging furniture on a plane they're still flying. They were blind. And worse, arrogantly blind. Which is how planes crash. It was bittersweet, watching it unfold from a distance. I didn't want it to fall apart. I'd spent most of my adult life making sure it didn't fall apart. But I also wasn't going to lift a finger to stop what they'd started. Cut the rope and told themselves they could levitate. Turns out, gravity still works. The only thing left was to wait for the loud thud that always follows a long, confident silence. 2 floors below the executive suite, buried behind glass walls and dying spider plants, the engineers had started whispering. Not slacking, not emailing, whispering. In an office with 120 decibel stand-ups and weekly gong hits for milestone moments, whispers were the smoke before the blaze. The acquisition was everywhere. $180 million. That number echoed through every hallway, every budget sheet, every Slack channel like a gospel. Posters went up in the kitchen. Demo week, show them what we're made of. The buyer, a mid-sized enterprise solutions firm from Chicago, was set to roll through for the technical deep dive. Word was they'd already sent a short list of due diligence questions, and the CTO, bless his shiny optimism, promised a seamless full-stack demo using modern container architecture. Translation: he was gambling the entire deal on tech he didn't understand, run by teams he'd spent the last 3 weeks undermining. In theory, the infrastructure was containerized. In practice, the containers were duct-taped together with YAML files written by a junior dev on his second monster of the morning. CI/CD pipelines were still running on a hybrid setup, half Jenkins, half Magic, with deployment tokens that expired like milk. One engineer posted in a private channel, "Did anyone re-auth the deployment tokens for prod env demo?" No reply. Another chimed in, "Wait, who signed off on the staging cert updates? Mine are still flagged with an invalid route." Still no reply. Just the blinking cursor of doom. Meanwhile, CTO was strutting through the halls like he'd personally invented DevOps. His assistant followed behind with printed slide decks. Big graphs, words like synergy, agility, and my personal favorite, post-architectural redundancy. I'd have laughed if it wasn't so tragic. They even started running dry rehearsals. Day 1, load times were abysmal. The metrics dashboard lagged 5 seconds behind real-time events. One could explain why the user authentication flow stalled halfway through. One intern suggested the server clock might be desynced. Another said, maybe it's a DNS thing. No one said the real thing. Maybe we broke the parts we didn't understand. The buyer sent over their lead technical engineer to audit the environment remotely. Just a courtesy, they said. Just a handshake before the handshake. But everyone knew what it meant. Don't send your top engineer unless you expect to find rust under the chrome. He asked for access to the sandbox environment. He asked for logs, for audit trails, for validation reports. And with every request, another engineer looked around and realized, we don't have that anymore. Or we did, and then someone deleted the only key ring that could access it. Someone like me. I watched it all from afar. Heard about it through back channels, emails forwarded to my personal inbox with subject lines like "you didn't get this from me." I never responded, never stirred the pot. But I did read every word, every flag, every sign that the center could no longer hold. The CTO held another all-hands the Friday before the demo. He wore a black shirt, no logo, serious mode, told the team how proud he was. How this was the culmination of everything they'd worked for. We were just days away from redefining the future of enterprise integration. And in the back row, an engineer I'd mentored once texted another, "Are we sure the deployment flow can still handshake with the production cert tree?" The response came 10 minutes later. No one ever replaced Dana in the trust chain. I think the system still thinks she's alive. Alive, as if I'd died. Maybe I had to them, but the infrastructure still remembered me, and I wasn't angry, wasn't vindictive. I was simply watching. Watching as they pulled the pin and called it progress. Watching as they packed a demo full of promises, unaware they'd built it on sand. Watching as a countdown ticked silently toward a moment no one could stop. Not because I broke anything, but because they never learned how it worked without me. Demo day arrived like a parade no one rehearsed for. The executive suite was polished to a shine. Someone had even swapped out the sad old Keurig for a countertop espresso machine that hissed steam like a train engine ready to crash. Catered pastries from a local place that only spelled donut with the ugh. Everyone in marketing wore black, like they were attending the funeral of Risk. The CTO had on his stage face. No socks, polished loafers, and a fresh haircut that screamed exit bonus. He was pacing near the touch wall, tapping the slide deck one last time, rehearsing buzzwords like he was trying to summon them. Behind him, the internal team sat in quiet dread, some with laptops open, some fake smiling through anxiety sweats, all praying silently to the gods of clean compiles and stable endpoints. At 10:02 a.m., the buyer's team logged into the private link. 3 engineers, 1 corp dev lead, a VP in a blazer that probably cost more than the entire QA department's budget. They nodded, smiled, sipped coffee. The CTO clicked begin presentation, and then nothing. No dashboard, no interactive user flow. Just a flicker, a pause, and then error. 500 internal server error auth service. Token validation failed user gateway. SSL certificate mismatch system monitor. Critical alert, core API unresponsive. The air in the room changed. From caffeinated optimism to confused silence, like a power outage during surgery. CTO blinked, tried to restart the demo. Cycled the dashboard container, reloaded the tab, still nothing. Then the server monitor flashed red, all of them. Every single one of the internal dashboards, the real ones, not the fake demo ones, started reporting critical failures. The system wasn't just misbehaving, it was choking. Every handshake failed. Every cert refused to verify. Services didn't cascade, they collapsed. Like dominoes made of wet cardboard. Backend error logs scrolled like the credits to a bad movie. A horror film, really. One where the killer's name was unresolved key signature. The CTO stammered something about caching. Blamed latency. Blamed staging environments. Called over IT. IT looked like they'd rather be shot into space. Then, in a house in the suburbs, several miles away, my phone buzzed. A single-line alert from a fail-safe script I'd written over a decade ago. Alert. Core handshake failed. Signature unresolved. That message only appears when the system is trying to complete a trusted transition path that no longer exists, or more specifically, when it's looking for me. I stared at it for a second. Just 1 second. No smirk, no laughter, just quiet. Then I silenced the phone. I didn't gloat. It wasn't joy. It was inevitability. I never booby-trapped anything. Never sabotaged a single system. Everything failed exactly how it was supposed to fail. Safely, securely, and with zero tolerance for unverified access. That wasn't sabotage. That was design. A design no one ever took the time to inherit. I imagined the CTO's face turning that peculiar shade of executive panic, somewhere between red wine and bad seafood. I pictured him swiping open a Slack thread, while 20 people behind him Googled rollback hotfix without rollback. Somewhere, someone was probably rebooting a server manually, as if that ever solved anything. The buyer's engineers weren't saying much. They didn't have to. Their screens told them everything. Failed services, API timeouts, trust chains broken mid-handshake. The kind of errors that say, this house has no foundation. And the best part, no one could blame me. I wasn't on the payroll. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't even in the system. I was just a ghost the machine still remembered and refused to forget. It's the thing about infrastructure. When you build it right, it doesn't scream when you leave. It just waits. And when the wrong hands touch it, it shuts the whole thing down. The silence that followed wasn't the normal kind. It was the kind that makes a room feel like it's shrinking. You could hear the HVAC sputtering through the vents and the faint buzz of fluorescent lighting that had no right to be that loud. The buyer's engineer, older guy, thick glasses, no-nonsense haircut, tilted his head at the error logs blinking on the screen. He didn't look angry. He looked puzzled, like a mechanic popping a hood and finding shredded wires where an engine should be. Who owns the core architecture? He asked calmly, like it was just a checkbox on his list. The CTO blinked. Once. Twice. He looked at legal. Legal looked at HR. HR looked like she'd just been asked to explain quantum physics using a scented marker and a napkin. Someone handed legal a printed org chart. It was 4 pages of glossy color-coded nothing. Boxes with names. Arrows with job titles. Strategic overlays. Circles labeled ownership clusters. A beautifully designed map of nowhere. They flipped through it slowly. Nothing. The system architecture node had a note under it, TBD role under restructuring. One of the buyer's engineers leaned forward slightly, squinting at the screen. You don't have an architect on it. The CTO cleared his throat. We, transitioned off that legacy model. We've modularized, the buyer cut him off. Modularized what? These errors aren't modular. Your cert chain is broken. The trust path is dead. Who signed off the handshake logic? And that's when it happened. That moment every seasoned tech lead knows, the death rattle of leadership confidence. Because the CTO, standing there in front of 24 people and a $180 million deal, just fumbled the answer. He stared blankly. He didn't know, not just what to say. He didn't know the name, he didn't know my name. He started, fumbling through the deck, hoping the documentation would bail him out. I think it was Dana something, Darlene, Dahlia. The buyer's lead engineer raised an eyebrow. You don't know your system architect's last name. There was a moment, just a heartbeat, when someone in the back of the room tried to stifle a cough and failed. It came out like a bark, a jagged, involuntary burst of disbelief. HR turned pale. Legal looked down. The CTO smiled nervously, as if trying to laugh along with the absurdity of it all, but even he could feel it now. Collapse, not of code, not of tech, of trust. The buyer's VP closed his laptop, not angrily, just slowly. Like a funeral director preparing the body. I think we've seen enough for today, he said. No yelling, no finger pointing. Just a slow collective realization that the house had no foundation, and the person who laid the bricks was no longer listed in the building plans. The CTO opened his mouth again, probably to blame someone, or maybe to ask for more time. But the buyer's team was already standing. One of them politely placed a branded USB stick on the table. Our preliminary notes, he said, will follow up. The stick might as well have been a grenade. As they walked out, CTO turned to legal, then to the VP of Ops, then to the floor. I assumed the transition was. It's not like she ever said she did, someone whispered behind him. You just didn't listen, and there it was, the turning point. In that conference room filled with brilliant minds, coffee breath, and echoing silence, the truth dropped like a final stone. The system had never been handed off. Not formally. Not structurally. Not functionally. It removed the one person who knew how it all held together, and not one of them had bothered to ask for the blueprint. And now the buyer knew it too. It wasn't just a failed demo, it was exposure. And the only person who wasn't unraveling in that moment, me, sitting at home, window open, fresh breeze, the faint sound of birds outside. I was making a sandwich, nothing fancy. Just turkey, mustard, and the knowledge that sometimes you don't need revenge. Sometimes you just need to be absent long enough for the truth to show up in your place. The voicemail came at 7:42 a.m. Sandwiched between a robocall from someone trying to sell me solar panels and a calendar alert reminding me to cancel an old gym membership I hadn't used since they switched the water pressure in the showers. The voice was clipped, composed, vibrating underneath with the kind of forced neutrality you only hear from people trying not to panic. Hi, Dana. This is Marissa Bell, liaison for the board. There's been a situation. We'd appreciate a chance to speak with you. Privately, please call back at your earliest convenience. She didn't specify what kind of situation. Didn't have to. I'd already heard it whispered through the grapevine, engineers pinging each other on Signal. Ex-coworker texting me late the night before. They're scrambling. Demo tanked. CTO nearly cried. I didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, buttered a slice of toast like it was a luxury event, and sat in the kitchen, letting the voicemail repeat twice. Just listening to her tone. Calculating the difference between cordial and desperate. It was desperation, gift-wrapped in professionalism. Then I opened my old folder I hadn't touched since the day they walked me out. Inside, it sat the one thing they didn't know I still had. The full transition guide. It wasn't some revenge file. I'd written it months ago, an internal blueprint mapping out system logic, failover routes, trust chain resets, and every certificate migration step required post-departure. It was clean. It was annotated. It was never requested. They thought a system could be inherited like an office chair, rolled into someone else's corner and expected to function. But this wasn't furniture. This was architecture, and I was the last one who knew where all the load-bearing beams were. I called Marissa back at noon, let her sweat the morning. She answered on the second ring. Dana, thank you so much for calling. I'll meet, I said, but not at your office. I picked the location, and my counsel will be present. A pause, just long enough to register surprise. Of course, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm very comfortable. That's why I'm setting the terms. Another pause, then a subdued understood. We scheduled the meeting for the next morning. A quiet corner suite in a law firm downtown, not the one I usually used, but one with glass walls and an intimidating view. Not for intimidation's sake, just to be clear about the difference between me needing a favor and me granting one. I wore a charcoal blazer, not power dressing. Just precise. Walked in 10 minutes early. My attorney, Emily, was already there, tablet out, hair in a no-nonsense bun that somehow made her look like she'd been born in a deposition. Marissa arrived alone. She was polite, apologetic, even, but careful with her words. There was confusion around the system architecture. Some redundancies failed to engage. The board would very much like your insight on what might have gone wrong. She avoided saying catastrophic, probably instructed by legal not to admit fault. Smart, I let her finish. Then opened my portfolio, laid the transition guide on the table and slid it toward her. She looked at it like it might explode. This outlines the formal handoff procedures that were never initiated, I said. The chain of custody, signature key requirements, deprecated cert retirement, everything. Had I been consulted, this would have already been executed. She flipped through the pages slowly, eyes scanning faster than her brain could likely process. Dana, the board would like to offer you a consulting retainer to help restore stability. We're prepared to compensate you accordingly, generously. I'm not interested, she blinked. Not even for a temporary contract? I shook my head. I'm not interested in cleaning up someone else's mess. What I am interested in is clarity, respect, ownership. The next time someone builds their house on a foundation I laid, expect the plaque to have my name on it. Marissa nodded slowly, like she was swallowing a truth that tasted worse than expected. I understand. Good. Then you also understand that I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to close a loop that you left open. I left the guide with her, not out of mercy, not out of pride, just because it was mine to give and no one else's to claim. As we left the firm, Emily glanced sideways at me and said, "Really could have charged them." I shrugged. That would have made it a transaction. I needed it to be a correction. Behind us, the board's liaison sat in silence, staring at the document like it had rewritten history. And in a way, it had. The board rented a neutral site for the meeting. Not the company's glass fortress, not some swanky hotel lounge, but a quiet, understated law office in Midtown, one with frosted windows, soundproof walls, enough corporate neutrality to say, let's pretend we never met. They didn't invite the CTO. That was clear from the empty seat with a nameplate flipped face down. A silent admission of failure. He'd been the architect of their unraveling, and now they needed the actual architect to sew the structure back together. They didn't say it like that, of course. They dressed it in committee speak: strategic recovery, core resilience advisory, temporary reintegration. Words that meant we screwed up and you're the only one who can unscrew it. There were 6 of them, 1 lawyer, 1 operations VP, 4 board members in tailored suits and expensive silence. They didn't offer coffee, probably too afraid I'd interpret it as transactional. I brought a small manila envelope and a black USB drive. No fanfare, no dramatic reveal. Just the truth in clean folders and labeled schemas was the digital version of handing someone their house keys after they locked themselves out mid-shower. This contains the original system map, I said, placing the flash drive gently in the center of the table. It includes all documented transitions, architecture annotations, credential transfer protocols, and certificate expiration timelines. Everything your CTO could have asked for. Everything he chose to ignore. The operations VP shifted uncomfortably in his chair. One of the board members cleared his throat like he'd swallowed regret the wrong way. It's very thorough, he said, opening the laptop in front of him to check the contents. The folders were named plainly: /auth chain root, /cert rotation 2023, /transition guide final. No cute names. No hidden zingers. I wasn't here to gloat. You'll find a README file, I continued, with annotations for each service's shutdown path and dependency matrix. If you follow the migration order, your systems will stabilize in under 72 hours. If you skip steps again, I paused. Well, you've seen what happens. There was no sarcasm in my voice, no bitterness. Just facts laid bare like blueprints before a storm. The oldest board member, white beard, tired eyes, finally leaned forward. We owe you an apology. No, I said calmly. Owe your employees an apology. You owe your buyers transparency. What you owe me is recognition. He nodded slowly. Fair. There was a long beat. Then the woman from legal adjusted her glasses. We'd like to formally offer you a consulting retainer, executive level. Flexible terms. Generous compensation, your discretion on scope. I didn't laugh, didn't smirk. I just smiled once, soft and final. I decline. She blinked. May I ask why? Because I'm not here to clean up your disaster. I came to prove I never caused it. Another silence. But this one wasn't awkward, it was respectful. Heavy with the realization that this wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a reckoning. I stood. They didn't stop me. The old man offered his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm but hesitant, like he knew he was shaking hands with the person who had every right to sink them, but chose not to. As I walked out, past the flipped nameplate again. I paused, turned it over. His name still burned my eyes, 5 letters and a linked-in certified disaster. I tucked the card into my coat pocket, not as a trophy, as a reminder. They let him erase me from their diagrams, but they had to come back to me to make the system whole. Control isn't about shouting. It's about knowing when the silence speaks louder. The second demo happened 3 days later. No banners this time, no kwasas shaped like the company logo. Just muted suits and cautious optimism, like a prom that got rescheduled after a fire in the gymnasium. The buyer's team rejoined the call, same lead engineer, same VP, same unreadable expressions. But now they moved slower, asked fewer questions. They were waiting to see if the machine could run without bleeding. This time, it did. The dashboards loaded instantly. Metrics pulled clean. Auth tokens handshook like old friends reunited. The buyer's lead engineer tapped a few keys, ran a simulated failover, and watched the system self-correct without a hiccup. He smiled, not out of excitement, but out of respect. "This is what we expected the first time," he said. Not to the CTO, he wasn't there anymore, but to the room. "It's very disciplined." No one spoke the name behind that discipline. They didn't have to. Board issued a statement 2 hours later. Dry, legal, but pointed in all the right ways. We acknowledge an oversight in transition protocol and formally reinstate Dana Keller's authorship and architectural credit across all relevant documentation. We thank her for her foundational contributions and commitment to system integrity. No apology, just acknowledgement. That's all I ever wanted. The CTO resigned for health reasons later that night. It is, he tried to spin it as burnout. Someone else said he was going to pursue passion projects. His email bounced by morning, so did his Slack. The company scrubbed his name from the homepage before lunch, like he'd never existed. But the systems, they still bore mine. That afternoon, I walked the trail by the river, leaves crunching underfoot, sun breaking through a tangle of clouds like it finally remembered how. I wore the same coat I'd worn the day they fired me. Funny how something that once held shame now just felt warm. Jazz played softly in my ears. Coltrane, Nema, a quiet melody that never rushed, never begged for attention, just took its time and filled the space. Halfway through the trail, my phone buzzed. $180M deal closed. That was the alert. Then, a text. From a number I hadn't seen in years. One of the junior engineers I'd mentored way back when he still thought YAML was a typo. Just 3 words. Saved us? I stood still for a moment, letting the message sink in like morning light on cold soil. Then I smiled, not broadly, not triumphantly, just enough. Because the thing about building something right, quietly, patiently, without ego, is that it doesn't need to scream to be seen. It endures. And when the world forgets who made it, it finds a way to remind them. I never wanted revenge. I wanted them to know, to remember, who built what they broke. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.